Move. Hmm.
8 o'clock.
Yep, it's 8 o'clock.
Hi, Rabbi Diamond. Good evening.
Hi,
My
Selma.
speaker's not working. Okay, here I have to get out. This is ridiculous.
Hi, Andy. Hi, Neil, Jimmy.
Oh, I've had this before.
Hi, Vicky, Nathan.
Yeah. Restart. I don't know why my speaker's not working.
Can you hear me now?
Me?
No, Selma.
I want to connect my cell phone so somebody else can hear it. And they say it's very difficult. I'm going to call on the telephone so they can hear it.
Okay.
Rabbi, do you actually have another shiur just before this one?
No, but I think that there are two Zoom links that get sent out. I apologize. That may be it. So I think it's the same
Oh.
link, but with two invitations. So I realize now that what the shul has done is, as opposed to what they used to do, I think they have already sent out this as a standing invitation. I
Right.
didn't know that, and so I send out another one. But that means that when you come onto the listening, it shows that there may be something else in progress. But it's so I cancel that one and I'm back on this one.
Technology marvelous.
You what?
Technology is marvelous, but it works out in the end, doesn't it?
Yeah, technology is great. It's great until it's not great. And sometimes it turns out to be more not great than great. That leaves in my hands. I don't know. But let's 1 second.
Please enter the meeting password followed.
Okay.
You
Hold on, guys. I just want to. Wait a minute. Do you have the?
Password is invalid. You are in the meeting now. You are the first participant. Please stand by.
Okay. Okay, let me try this one. Doesn't work.
And I got on because I went to the shul website, but the people that won't know it, the other people won't know.
Hi, everybody. So sorry about the delay, but thank you for hanging in there. I really appreciate it. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that Jemmy and Neil are sponsoring this in honor of the Shiur. Jemmy and Neil live in Calgary, as you probably know. They spend some time in Toronto to be with their kids and grandchildren.
I tried
And
to.
when they're here, they delight me by coming to the downstairs.
I'll put them on this way.
1 second. I'm going to see if we can move this.
I'll put my cell phone on too.
So they delight me and everybody by coming to the downstairs meeting, and they are so generous to be our sponsors for tonight in honor of all of our time together learning Torah. So thank you, Jemmy. Thank you, Neil. Safe trip back to Calgary as always, and look forward to when you come back again to Toronto. It's always a treat for me. And I hope you have safe travels and a wonderful summer in Calgary. And I hope it doesn't snow. That was a joke. Okay. It's been an amazing week, like from Tuesday to Tuesday, how the world has changed. It was crazy. Everybody went into Shabbos wondering what's going to be, and then boom, and that's I guess a pun. But Motzi Shabbos, we opened up, and like everything changed. The whole world seemed to have changed. So Yetz Hashem, what happened on Shabbos should actually be the beginning of a period of change. I think I would be remiss to not point out that what we're seeing is miracles. We really are. We're living in a period of miracles. I'm not I don't know whether this is the Ikvata the Mashiach, meaning Otot. I will tell you a story that I heard today. It's from a reputable Rav, Rabbi Lawrence Hayoff. It's in Manhattan. He's a teacher at Stern College, and does other important things for the Jewish community. So he told a story from the Gabbai of his shul. The Gabbai of his shul davens every morning at a Nates Minyan somewhere else, because he really is careful to daven every morning, 7 days a week, at a Nates Minyan. This is a true story. He just told us. And so he went to the Nates Minyan, must have been yesterday, maybe the day before, and there's an elderly gentleman there who he didn't know before. So he introduced himself, and the gentleman identified himself as Rabbi Zaks. So Rabbi Lawrence knew enough to remember that the Chafetz Chaim's grandson's family is Zaks. His daughter, the Chafetz Chaim's daughter, married somebody whose name was Zaks. So he asked this person, are you related to the Chafetz Chaim in some way? And he said, yes, the Chafetz Chaim is my grandfather, because the Chafetz Chaim died in the year 1933. So this man told Rabbi Lawrence the following story. He says that at some point, I don't know when, the Chafetz Chaim turned to his daughter, who is the mother of this Rabbi Zaks who was speaking, and he said to his mother, he said, you will not live to see the Mashiach come, but your grandchildren will. Now, Rabbi Zaks is a man in his mid to late 80s. And the Chafetz Chaim said to this man that he will live to see the Mashiach come. So, as I said, are we in that period of time? Is this the time of the Mashiach? I don't know. Chafetz Chaim said some extraordinary things in his life. Some of it was prescient, and he had an idea what the future is going to look like. You hear it, son, may be Hashem's will that we actually be in those times of the coming of the Mashiach. But the miracles that we see, the small ones, the big ones, I mean, if you just think about the harm, certainly the physical harm that ballistic missiles can inflict, and then compare it to the harm that these ballistic missiles from Iran have actually inflicted, you say, oh my gosh, it's amazing that there's been so little damage. And of course, one answer could be yes, well, we have the Iron Dome and the American interceptors. It's not untrue, but I think it's also true to say that there's hashgacha pratit, there's divine providence. So maybe I hope we're living in those times, and I hope you and I and our children and grandchildren, everybody in the world gets to see the arrival of the Mashiach, an understanding of God's presence in the world, and bringing a change to the world we live in, removal of hate, removal of violence, removal of anti-Semitism, removal of taking advantage of one or the other. So here at Sona, and may our Torah study tonight, thank you, Jenny and Neil, may it just be some merit towards making that all happen. Let me just say a couple of words about today's Parsha's Korach, but not just Parsha's Korach. No, I suspect for many of us, when we think about the study of the Torah stories, we're probably drawn to the amazing stories in Sefer Breshit, Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and the incredible depth and richness of rabbinic perspective on that over thousands and thousands of years, and probably Sefer Shmuel, certainly the first part, which talks about the slavery and liberation in Yetziat Mitzrayim. And then we get to Sefer Bimidbar. So I had a chance to speak at Shul. For those who may remember or weren't there, Sefer Bimidbar is a very significant turning point in the history of the Jewish people. Last week in Parsha Be'alotcha, the Torah talks about two verses that we're very familiar with because they're the verses when we open up the Aron Kodesh to take out a Sefer Torah, and the verse when we return the Sefer Torah. Vahi bin so Aharon, and then Uvnu Chol Yomar. These two verses follow each other, and they're bracketed in the Torah, literally bracketed by what looks like inverted nunim, two inverted letter nuns. The point is, as Rav Soloveitchik, amongst others, contend that those two verses actually make up what should have been a completely new Chumash. That Sefer Bimidbar, or even Jewish history, should have taken a completely separate turn. And those two verses, Vahi bin Saron and Uvnu Chol Yomar, were verses that ought to have begun the march of the Jewish people into the land of Israel. And into the land of Israel would have been a change of Jewish history. Rav Soloveitchik maintains that under the leadership of Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest prophet, the greatest person who ever spoke to God, the Mashiach would certainly have come. And Jewish history would unfold it, and who knows where we would be at this moment in time. We probably wouldn't be sitting wherever we are. We would all be together in Eretz HaKodesh. We would be in Israel. Life would have been different. So what happened? So what happened is the second half of Sefer Bimidbar, which are the Parshat that we're studying, where things just got off the rails and things began to unravel. So in some ways, when you read the book of, when I read the book of Breshit, it's inspiring. It is, it really is. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But in a certain way, maybe in a way that is more reflective of the human condition that we're more used to, Sefer Bimidbar in some ways seems like it's a whole lot more relevant. Why? Because it's a story of people grappling and falling. It's not a story of amazing successes. It's a story of the weaknesses that get exposed, the things that people say that, oh my gosh, I can't believe you said that. Yeah, that's what Sefer Bimidbar tells us about. Opportunities lost because people make mistakes. And in some ways, maybe, at least I'm speaking personally, it's easier to understand that than it is perhaps to think of yourself as a Yitzchak Avinu on the altar for the Akedah, or Yaakov Avinu and having to deal with what he had to deal with. But Sefer Bimidbar, and we'll see in Parshas Korach, bring up themes that, and I've said this multiple times in our studies together, the Torah is not just telling you a story of the world that has passed. The Torah is telling you a story of the world that has passed because this story is not about them only, it's about us. And that the themes in the Torah, we need to sort of understand where we fit into the story. So with that beginning, with that introduction, let's try to cover some specific ideas in Parshat Korach. So the first thing I want to do is draw a bridge, or establish a bridge between the end of last week's Parsha and the beginning of this week's Parsha. So last week's Parsha, as you know, was Shlach. It's the Parsha of Moshe Rabbeinu sending the 12 spies to Israel, and whatever happened, of course, they for whatever reason, and there's really so many different opinions, they came back, spread stories about the land of Israel that dissuaded the Jewish people from going. Hashem got very angry, was on the brink of destroying this nation, and at the behest of Avram Avinu, of Moshe Rabbeinu, who activated the Yud Gimel Mivot, Hashem, Korach, Rachanum, that Hashem himself told Moshe Rabbeinu that in times of anger and God's displeasure, Moshe should, or anybody should, recite these verses in order to bring about God's compassion. Moshe does that. God forgives him. Salachti ki barecha. However, instead of marching directly in a matter of days northward into Israel, the Jewish people were destined to die. At least all those who were above the age of 20 were destined to die in the desert. And that, of course, is what actually happens. But the very end of last week's Parsha is a Parsha that is familiar to us, for those who recite the Shema on a daily basis, and maybe even a little bit more familiar to those of us who are men wearing tzitzit. The end of the Parsha talks about the mitzvah of tzitzit. Now, it is a well-known principle of rabbinic interpretation. The Gemara talks about this a lot, as to why ideas and topics are juxtaposed one to the other. And so that question is also a question which is dealt with by various commentaries who want to know, is there a significance, or what is the significance between the end of Parshat Shlach dealing with the mitzvah tzitzit and the beginning of this week's Parsha, or the entire Parsha, in fact, the whole thing, which is Korach, the rebellion of Korach. So I just want to share an idea with you. So Rashi, quoting a rabbinic tradition, suggests that one of the connections is Korach used the mitzvah of tzitzit as a leverage, as a way of achieving his goals. So Rashi tells us that at the beginning of the Parsha, Korach invoked the mitzvah of tzitzit in his campaign to undermine Moshe Rabbeinu's authority. That was one of the goals that Korach had, was to undermine Moshe's authority in the hope that he, Korach, would be inserted into a position of leadership and authority. So according to the Midrash, Korach had his cohort dress themselves in clothing and garments that were dyed entirely the color of tchelet, that blue color that's supposed to sort of remind you of the sky. So everybody, imagine a throng of people all dressed in tchelet, not just with a little string on their tzitzit, but everything is dressed in tchelet. And he goes to Moshe in the presence of all these people, and he asks Moshe whether these garments that have four corners on them, he was careful to construct clothing that had arba kanfut, necessitating, theoretically, the tzitzit. And so he asked Moshe whether these garments would require tzitzit. And Moshe answered, yeah, they require tzitzit. To which point Korach responded, ridiculed, he mocked Moshe Rabbeinu, and he said, how is that possible? Because if a single thread in a regular tzitzit, a single thread of patil, which is tchelet, somehow suffices to fulfill the mitzvah, then surely an entire garment would fulfill the mitzvah and would not need a single thread. That was his argument. So, says Rashi, or at least implies Rashi, that the mitzvah of tzitzit became one of the ruses or tools that he used, Korach, to sort of further his unfortunate goals. Rabbi Yehuda Amital Zecher Tzaddik Livracha was one of the two founding Rashi Yeshiva of the Shiva in Gush Etzion called Har Etzion. He, and along with Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, were the two founding Rashi Yeshiva, both of whom have passed on. And Rav Amital was a very prolific thinker, very profound thinker, and he too compiled all sorts of ideas. I'm not sure he wrote books, but the Talmidim and the Yeshiva knew that they were in the presence of greatness and carefully recorded many of the things that Rabbi Yehuda Amital said in all the different shiurim or public shmuzin and discussions, sichot, that he had. So he suggests maybe another point of connection between Korach's uprising and the mitzvah of tzitzit. So one of the things that we're going to see in a little bit, one of the mantras, one of the arguments, one of the slogans that Korach tried to use to convince Moshe to step down and let others replace him was Kol Ha'ida Kulam Kedoshim. The entire assembly, Kol Ha'ida, everybody is Kadosh. All Bnei Israel are sacred. And so because everybody is sacred, because everybody theoretically would seem to be on the same playing field, what don't you need? You don't need a leader. Because leaders then somehow have to be distinguished from the rest of the people. There's something about them which elevates them. But if we come to a decision, or if we agree that everybody heard the voice of God, as they did at Har Sinai, then everybody is Kadosh. And so they don't require a leader, neither Moshe or not even Aaron. And so Rav Amital pointed out that this proclamation of Kol Haida Kulam Kedoshim stands in sort of, or reminds us of another phrase, which you may remember if you know the Shema off by heart, in which we invoke the notion of Kedoshim. Laman tizkeru v'asitem kol mitzvotai v'hitem Kedoshim L'lechem. So you may remember to perform all my mitzvah and be holy to your God. So the mitzvah tzitzit invokes the notion of the holiness of the person wearing it, but even more than that, perhaps even the holiness of the Jewish people. So Korach spoke of Kedusha, says Rabbi Mital, as a de facto status of every member of Bnei Israel. God speaks, so meaning everybody's automatically Kadosh. Everybody's saying Har Sinai, you're automatically Kadosh. Why? Because you heard God. You stood there, you heard God, boom, you're elevated to Kedusha. But that's not what the context is in the mitzvah of tzitzit. In order to reach the level of Kedusha, the mitzvah of tzitzit says you have to do something. You need to do the mitzvah. And the mitzvah is supposed to remind you. And the mitzvah is supposed to elevate you. Korach's claim was, you don't have to do anything. You're born into a state of Kedusha. You're born into a state of holiness. You heard God's voice. I shouldn't say you were born. That's not exactly right. You were standing at Har Sinai, surrounding the mountain. So boom, you're automatically Kadosh. The mitzvah of tzitzit says, no, that's not enough. That's not the type of holiness that God is looking for us to create or to live. Our Kedusha is a lived Kedusha through action, through effort, through a intentional lifestyle that seeks to elevate us. So for Korach, Kedusha sort of like really was just a slogan. It was a mantra, a rallying cry for which to promote his personal agenda. But really, in truth, Kedusha is something, according to what the Torah is teaching us, that you and I have to work for. It's a goal that must be pursued and not a sort of an automatic condition that is granted to us. And so here is a transcription of some of the words of Rabbi Mital, one of his students, as I said, transcribing what he said. While God does refer to the Jewish people as becoming a holy nation with the receiving of the Torah, this status does not come automatically. It requires tremendous effort. And as the Rambam explains, holiness requires going beyond the letter of the law in observance of halakha, so as not to be a sordid person within the permissible realm of the Torah. Korach comes out very clearly against this. All of the community are holy. We have already attained the status of holy. We don't need to work hard on this. It comes to us automatically from God. He thinks that the great challenges that constitute true service of God are as easy as reciting a slogan. And this is his mistake. He thinks one can summarize his service of God in a slogan that can be encapsulated in a bumper sticker. So what I think that Rabbi Mital is saying, at least to me, why it resonated, is that idea is that, Sefer B'midbar, this part of Sefer B'midbar reminds us that, yeah, it's about effort. It is about effort. It's about trying, and maybe not always succeeding, but it's always about trying. Judaism is a growth mindset religion. There's no question about it. It's a growth mindset religion. Korach seems to be against that and suggesting we've already achieved what we need to achieve, so now let's just redistribute who's got what position. And the answer to that is no, that's not the way we constitute the society, the Jewish society, the Torah society in which we live. Okay, so let's talk a little bit again about what it is that the Torah tells us was the stated claim of Korach. So I just want to read from, if you're using a Chumash, please feel free to join. If not, it's okay. I'm just reading out loud anyways. We're on Perek Tet Zayin, chapter 16. And I'm going to read in the English to save some time. I'm going to read a few of the verses. Korach, son of Yitzhar, son of Kahat, son of Levi, separated himself with Datan and Aviram, sons of Eliav, and On, son of Pelach, the offspring of Reuven. They stood before Moshe with 250 members of the children of Israel, leaders of the assembly, those summoned for meeting, men of renown. They gathered together against Moshe and against Aharon and said to them, "It is too much for you. For the entire assembly, all of them are holy, and Hashem is among them. Why do you exalt yourselves over the congregation of Hashem?" Moshe heard and fell on his face. He spoke to Korach and to his entire assembly, saying, "In the morning Hashem will make known the one who is his own and the Holy One, and he will draw him close to himself, and whomever he will choose, he will draw close to himself. Do this, take for yourselves fire pans, Korach and his entire assembly, and put fire in them, and place incense upon them before Hashem tomorrow. Then the man whom Hashem will choose, he is the Holy One. It is too much for you, O offspring of Levi. So let's just stop here. So what we see here is a play for what seems to be power. It's interesting that it's not explicit, it's alluded to, and in fact, the Chachamim try to understand what is it that Korach was really asking for, which I find to be so interesting that the Torah is not crystal clear about that. The story is not recorded in a manner that the reader walks away knowing exactly what was at stake and exactly what the problem was. You do need to scratch a little bit on the surface to get to the, I guess, the fullness of understanding so we know what's happening. But here's an observation shared by Rav Shimshon Pincus of blessed memory, Rabbi, North American born, moved to Israel, a prolific thinker, writer, teacher, Rabbi, and he wrote a lot of works in his lifetime, and some of his works were also collected by his students and printed posthumously. But in on this verse where Korach turns to Moshe Rabbeinu and says, Ki kol heida kulam kedushim, the entire congregation, we're all holy, uvetocham Hashem, and God is amongst them. Why, you, Moshe and Aharon, madua titnasu al kahal Hashem? Why are the two of you exalting yourselves over the congregation of Hashem? So Rabbi Pincus points out something interesting. He says, if you look through the Torah, this seems to be the only time that there seems to be a rebellion of people who want more power. So that's what Korach and all of these people are. They don't have the same, it's interesting, they don't have the same interests. They're not a organically or homogeneously collected group. Each of the various parts of this group have different interests. Korach has his group. Datan and Aviram have their interests. The 250 people have their interests. So they're not a natural collection of disenfranchised or disgruntled people, but they're joining together because maybe there's more influence or power in numbers. But Rav Shimshon Pincus points out that if you think about it and you look through the stories, there may be other stories of rebellion, dissatisfaction, but not because people wanted more. Now, it's an interesting observation. I mean, there were people who tried to become kings, so that is true, and certainly not in the Chumash. That happens in the Nevi'im. There were intrigues in palaces with certain people doing that, but certainly not in the Chumash. And it was a period of time of distinct power, distinct hierarchies in the community. We know that. We're told that according to some, that's one of the claims here in this Parsha. We have Kohanim, we have Levi'im, and we have Yisraelim. But outside of this moment in time, in the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, we don't find people saying, you know what, I want more, which led Rabbi Pincus to the following statement, Hebrew, and I'll translate. This teaches us, Adam ha'oseh ma shetzarich u'margish shememalei et tafkido b'shleimu, a person who does what needs to be done and feels that he or she is fulfilling his mission in its fullness, lo shayach etzlo shum kina. He doesn't experience or he doesn't feel jealousy. Afilu b'mi shegadol mimenu, even jealousy towards somebody who is greater than he. Ki kol hakina shorasha b'mesh margish shechaser lo, because the source of jealousy is that when a person feels that something is missing from him. And this leads him to be envious of his friend. But if he knows that he's doing that which he is supposed to do, even if his neighbor, his friend, the other, is on a higher level than he, Einhu mitkanebo klal. He doesn't feel jealous of. It's an interesting observation. I don't know if everybody agrees with this, but we all have our places in society. And we all know, it's so interesting in schools. And as you know, I've spoken a lot about my experience in the classroom. So if you were to go just about any classroom and you were to sort of informally ask the kids, who's the smartest kid in the class? They'll always answer you. Like they know who the smartest kid in the class is. What does that mean? It means kids naturally understand that there are differences between them. He's the smartest kid, and they don't seem upset about it. They don't. So he can answer the questions, but I can run faster when it comes to playing ball outside. And we're all okay with that. The best ball player plays ball, but he may not be a good mathematician. And the best kid in academics may not be able to, run or climb a rope. It doesn't matter. The point I'm making is we all know what we're good at, and we all know what we're not good at, and we recognize in other people that are better than us. And that's okay. And that's what he's saying. This story tells us that feeling was not prevalent. People seem to have felt okay with their stations in life. I don't know if that's true anymore. I'm not 100% sure. I think we definitely live in a time for those people who are more exposed, let me say it this way, more exposed either by their own desires or by default to a lot of the street culture and social media, which tells you what you're missing and makes you feel that you need to have something else, or makes you feel that, unless you have or look like somebody else, something's missing in you. And there's such a strong push societally to make us feel that way. But from the biblical stories that we see, that may not be the case. People seem to be okay with a genuine recognition of who they are and what their strengths are. But I want to stick a little bit more on this verse 3. So I want to read it again in Hebrew and then English this time. Vayikalu al Moshe v'Aharon. They gathered together They gathered together against Moshe and against Aharon and said to them. So they gathered. So we're talking about Korach. We're talking about Datan and Aviram. We're talking about Bnei Eliyav on the Peled Bnei Ruvain, the children of Ruvain. And then we're talking about a group of 250 people. So this group somehow coalesces in some fashion. And they go to Moshe and Aharon, and they say to them, Vayikalu al Moshe, they gather against Moshe. Vayamru alehem, they say to them, Rav lachem, ki kol ha'ida kulam kedoshim. One more time, they say, this is too much for you, meaning for Moshe and Aharon. For the entire assembly, all of them are holy, and Hashem is amongst them. Madua titnasu al kahal Hashem. And why do you exalt yourselves over the congregation of Hashem? So there's an interesting midrash on this section that somehow uncovers a theme which does not seem to be really evident in the words I just read to you. So when you take a look at the collection of midrashim called the Midbar Rabbah, it tells that when they were voicing their opposition to Moshe and Aharon, Korach and all the other people around him were accusing them, Moshe and Aharon, of overburdening the nation with too many mitzvahs and too many religious expectations. I'll read it in English. At that time, Korach assembled his group and said to them, Moshe and Aharon, you have placed upon us a greater burden than the Egyptian bondage. We were better off under Egyptian rule than under your rule. So it's interesting that they're saying, Moshe, what's wrong with you? Like you're this frummed out guy and you're telling us about all these chomers and all these things that we have to do. And this is terrible. Like where did you get there? Boy, I got so excited. Where did you come off coming and creating all of these religious expectations or restrictions that we never had. This is like worse than Egypt. So what were they saying? What was going on here? Is there any textual evidence, or is this sort of like an oral tradition that was passed down to us? So I often quote Rabbi Yehuda Leib Ginsburg from Lithuania, settled in Denver, wrote a commentary to a few things, amongst them his ideas on the Chumash. And in his collection of his ideas, excuse me, called Yalkut Yehuda, he suggests we can find the answer in Korach's claim, Ki kol ha'ida kulam kedoshim uvetocham Hashem, that the entire congregation are all holy, and amongst them is Hashem. For the entire congregation are all sacred, and Hashem is in their midst. The simple meaning, as says Rabbi Ginsburg, is that all Bnei Israel are sacred and don't need any more religious leadership. We're all holy. We're all holy. We're already on a level. Mitzvot seem to be necessary to help elevate a person. But if you're already elevated, then the whole purpose of mitzvah ought to fall away. So what are you trying to do? We don't need this, Moshe. We're on that level. Excuse me. The Midrash, however, perhaps understood this to mean that because the entire nation is sacred, they don't need so many mitzvot. So from Korach's perspective, mitzvot would, as I said, would only be necessary for those who are lowly, maybe decadent people who need to be disciplined and restrained. Korach insisted that Bnei Israel didn't need these rules because they had matured and risen to a spiritual status that made formal religious mitzvot, obligations, restrictions, superfluous. So, this is an interesting perspective. I don't know if anybody's been to any shiurim at our shul or other shuls. Very often before mincha or any other time, sometimes a shiur is finished and somebody gets up and quotes a mishnah from Pirkei Avot. Rabbi Chananya ben Akashya Omer, Rabbi Chananya ben Akashya states, Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'zakoti Yisrael, God wanted to bring merit to the Jewish people. Therefore, what did he do? Hirbah lehem Torah mitzvot. He gave them an abundance of Torah and mitzvot. Now, what does it mean? Because he wanted to give us merit, he gave us all these restrictions. What does that mean? So our response to Korach is the following. Our response to Korach is we accept with love, with gratitude, with embrace. We accept these mitzvot and we want to commit ourselves to doing them. Because we recognize, what do we recognize? Kulam Kedoshim. We're all sacred and deemed worthy by Hashem. We are deemed worthy. That part is true. Hashem deems us worthy. But how are we worthy? We're worthy for Hashem to give us something so dear to him, Torah and the mitzvot. For this is the reason that we cherish the opportunities. You give me a mitzvah that does something to me. I believe in that. And it's again a question of attitude. How do you take what's your attitude towards a mitzvah? Is your attitude towards a mitzvah it's just another pain and inconvenience, and if only I found a way to get rid of it, that would be really, really great? Or do you see it as an opportunity? On a simple level, you probably have seen this. I see this every morning. I daven early in the morning at 6:45 minyan. And honest to God, every single day of the week, Monday to Thursday, sometimes even Friday, there are like 4 or 5 men coming to collect money for tzedakah, almost all the time. And they have their formal, their certificate indicating that they're legit and they're really collecting for legit causes, but they're coming. And there sometimes is a tendency, oh my God, I hope they don't see me. Can I maybe somehow skip out so they don't catch me or we can miss each other? And that's one attitude, and I've seen it. And I have to admit that there are times that I've said, oh my gosh, I can't do this now. I got to run. I don't have. But I also know there's an attitude that, oh my gosh, let me give the guy money. And I've seen this. I go to shul, and these guys are wandering around, and they're guys who are in the middle of the Shmona Esrei. And the person collecting passed them by, and they couldn't obviously respond in the middle of the Shmona Esrei. As soon as they finish the Shmona Esrei, they take out the money and they go chase down the guy and give him the money. They chase down the guy. Why? They chase down the guy because they know it's a mitzvah and they don't want to give up on the mitzvah. They want to do something that might bring about the benefit. Korach didn't see things that way. And so, as I said before, there's a little bit of Korach maybe in some of us or me, that you're looking to get out of something rather than embracing it. Sometimes it's easier not to than it is to, whatever it is. And we say, oh, thank God we passed that one by. Yeah. We're in a very interesting time in our lives where things change, diets change. Well, we're talking about diets. So many years in school, at the beginning, in the very beginning, and for some time after that, we would teach the children about Birkat Hamazon, how to bench. And so after lunch, we get up there and we leave the children benching because you have to teach kids how to bench? Of course. So things have changed. What has changed? The benching hasn't changed. It's identical. But what's changed is people don't eat bread so much anymore. They'll have sushi, they'll have salad, they'll have pizza, but they're not having sandwiches. And so when you don't have a sandwich, then either you have to force a kid to eat bread, which is not always the best idea, it doesn't make sense, or they don't bench. But that also is caught on as another way around. I'm having a meal, but I'm not having bread. Why am I not having bread? Not just because I can't eat wheat, or not just because it's not healthy for me. It's because, oh my gosh, I don't want to bench. And so it's a way of avoiding the mitzvah of Birkat Hamazon. And so it's an example of how this mitzvah of Birkat Hamazon seems to have less mazel than other mitzvahs because it's falling in some ways into disuse. And there are many families, and I'm going to say this, it's probably true about me, honestly, that when do you bench? Probably on Shabbos, right? And so they're probably a whole generation of boys and girls growing up thinking that you only bench on Shabbos because they've never done it during the rest of the week. They never see their parents doing it because nobody's eating bread. So it's again, like, do we engage in a mitzvah because it somehow elevates us, it's important to us, or do we try to evade it and run away from it because it may be some sort of inconvenience? I want to talk about a point here in the Parsha that I think needs to be addressed here. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of tension in this story build up until it reaches a climax. And everybody knows the climax because it's one of the famous stories about the earth opening up and swallowing them up. But here's a part that I want to draw your attention to. So the story continues. I'm just going to read part of it with you. I did get to a part before. So Moshe, I'm going to continue now. I'm going to read it in English. So Moshe says to Korah, hear now, O offspring, sons of Levi, is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has segregated you from the assembly of Israel to draw you near to himself, to perform the service of the Mishkan of Hashem, and to stand before the assembly to minister to them? So he's saying, well, I don't understand what you want. You're already Levim. You do so much more than all regular Yisrael. And it's not enough. You're looking for more and more and more. And he drew near to you, speaking about Hashem with a capital H, and all your brethren, the offspring of Levi, with you. Yet you seek priesthood as well. Now you're coming and saying, no, it's not enough. I want to be a Levi. I want to be a Kohen Gadol. I want to leap up to another level. Therefore, you and your entire assembly that are joining together are against Hashem. And as for Aaron, what is it that you protest against him? Like, Aaron didn't do anything. What you're really not protesting against Aaron, and you're not really protesting against me. What this protest is, what this assembly is really about, what this insurrection is, you're revolting against God and God's right to create a hierarchy as God sees fit. So Moshe sent forth to summon Datan and Aviram, that's the other group, those two people who just were breathtakingly chutzpahdik to Moshe Rabbeinu. We shall not go up. No, wait, we're not talking to you, Moshe. Is it not enough that you have brought us up from a land flowing with milk and honey? You brought us up again. You took us from Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. What an irony, because always the story is Israel is Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, and they're calling Egypt. To cause us to die in the wilderness, yet you seek to dominate us, even to dominate further? Moreover, you didn't bring us to a land flowing with milk and honey, nor give us a heritage, a field and vine. We have nothing. We're in the desert. We've got nothing. Even if you would gouge out the eyes of those men, we shall not go up. Wow. Wow. What chutzpah. What chutzpah. And we, you listen to this and you think it's a story, but we also live in times of chutzpah. I mean, to think that there could be people who would dare to question authority. That's not a crazy idea. That's so much about the world in which we live, certainly on a geopolitical level. That this distressed Moshe greatly, and he said to Hashem, "Do not turn their gift offering. Don't accept anything any of their gifts. I have not taken even a single donkey of theirs, nor have I wronged even one of them." He's saying to Hashem, "I didn't do anything. There's no reason for them to be angry with me. Nothing. I've done absolutely nothing." Moshe said to Korach, "You and your entire assembly be before Hashem, you, they, and Aaron tomorrow. Let each man take his fire pan, and you shall place incense on them, and you shall bring them before Hashem, each man with his fire pan, 250 fire pans, and you and Aaron, each man with his fire pan." You want to see who God chose? Fine. You think that you should be the leader? Fine. Let's come up with a test to see who really ought to be the leader. Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aharon, saying, "Separate yourselves from amid this assembly, and I shall destroy them in an instant." And they fell on their faces, Moshe and Aharon said, "Oh God, God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and you be angry with the entire assembly?" I want to stop there. These last two verses. Separate yourselves from the assembly. Hibadlu mitoch edazo. So here's the question. Who is Hashem telling them to separate from? Who? So at first blush, it could mean, well, obviously, separate yourselves from Korach. They're the people who need to be punished, as it were. And therefore, 1 second, I'm just looking for the book. Therefore, they should be the ones, remake that safer, and they should be the ones, oh, here. They should be the ones to be punished. So separate from them. But it's interesting that some of the Meforshim are not talking about just Korach and Adato, that Hashem may in fact be using the word Edah more broadly, referring to who? All of the Jewish people. So just to remind you of the beginning of the story, and I know I glossed over it, but a little bit on purpose. So at the very beginning of the story, Vayikalu al Moshe va'Aaron vayomru alehem. So these people, Korach and that group, they gathered, but they didn't just gather by themselves. If we read carefully, they gathered with other people as well. In fact, Rashi says that what they did was they went to people's during the nighttime. The night after this happened, before they had to bring their fire pans, that would be the sign of the test. Korach spent the whole night going around from tent to tent, from tribe to tribe, using his really superlative oratory skills to explain to people why this just wasn't a fair situation. And he tried to get everybody to sort of be on the side. And so when the Torah tells us that it came to gathering with Moshe, it turns out that it wasn't just Korach and 250 people. Like, where was everybody else? Everybody else knew what was going on. This wasn't a private little affair that nobody saw, nobody heard. This was a very public affair. And so the truth of the matter is that yes, Moshe and Aaron were there outside of the Ohel Moed with Korach and with the 250 and with the people of Reuben, but also with everybody else. So what is the other possibility that's being discussed about separate yourselves from the Edah? The other possibility is that Hashem is saying to everybody, separate yourselves from the entire Jewish people. Whoa, why should they separate themselves from the entire Jewish people? So I'm just going to quote a couple of lines from Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, the medieval Jewish commentary. His commentary to the Torah is called Akedat Yitzchak. In English, this is what he says. God answered him that his wrath was caused by the fact that their standing near the wicked implied that they condoned their actions. They had to show by keeping away that they did not share their views. Hashem was expressing his upset, his anger with the Jewish people. Why? Yitzchak Rama says, because they just stood around. They were just curious. They were watching. Let me use a more popular word. They were all bystanders, looking at this whole thing unfold, watching Korach and these 250 people not really complaining about Moshe and not really complaining about Aharon, but really, really complaining about Hashem and Hashem's rulership over the entire community. The same God that did the Makot in Mitzrayim, the same God that split Yamsuf, the same God that was giving them man, the same God at Har Sinai, the same God with all of the miracles that they saw on a daily basis. That's the God that they're now challenging. Everybody just stood around. And Rabbi Yitzchak Rama says that when Hashem says, you better just separate yourselves from everybody here, what he wasn't just talking about was Korach and Adato. He was talking about everybody. And so Moshe says, Keil Elokei Haruchot, God, wait, please. Ha'ish echad yechetav al kol ha'idat tiksof. One person's sin, this is Korach, and you're going to now be angry with everybody? And Moshe is trying to dissuade God because he's saying, but there's a difference between what the Jewish people did and what everybody else did. They took an active role. Jewish people are just standing around as bystanders. So, there's a classic story of a bystander in Sefer Breshit. You may remember this. It's at the end of Parsha Noah. Now, you may not remember it from the Psukim, but you may remember it from the Torah Sheba'al Peh and maybe Rashi. This was one of the tests that, according to many of the commentaries, God tested Abraham. And do you remember the story about Nimrod throwing Abraham into the Kivshan Ha'esh? Do you remember that story? So the background of the story is Abraham's father is Terach. Terach went away for a while. Abraham, in his understanding of the nature of God, God's existence, and the worthlessness of idols, Abraham destroyed all the idols that Terach had made. And when Terach came back, unfathomably, the father snitched on his son, and the king Nimrod accused Abraham of a rebellion against Nimrod because that was the religion of the land, and Abraham was mocking the God of the land, the God that Nimrod called God. And so he threw Abraham into the fiery furnace. But you may remember that Abraham, at this point in his life, had a brother, and his brother was Haran. And Rashi tells us what happened to Haran, because he never gets mentioned after a certain point in the story, after this point. Well, Haran was watching to see what was happening to Abraham. And he made a sort of a cheshbon, he sort of figured this out to himself. If Abraham burns and dies, then I'm going to throw my hat in with Nimrod and declare my loyalty to Nimrod. If, on the other hand, something happens, God saves Abraham, then I'm going to side with Abraham, because obviously he's the right guy and God has saved him. It's a miracle, and I want to be amongst those who are saved in a miraculous way by God. So what happens? Avram gets saved. So Haran, Avram's brother, gets thrown in. And Haran assumed that the same miracle that happened to Avram, that he emerged from the fire unscathed, is going to happen to him. But he didn't. He dies. He gets consumed. Why? Because he didn't have the faith that Abraham had. This was like a calculus. This was a transaction. If this, then I'll get that. If that, I'll get this. And of course, that's not the way it works. But he was a bystander. He was just watching to see how things would turn out, and he would sort of align himself. He would become loyal to the person or the force that would be in his best interest. And so what Rabbi Yitzchak Rama is saying is such a contemporary idea, is that just standing around and watching when things begin to unravel is not a strategy that the Torah is good with. So I know that there are a lot of questions about what I just said. Meaning, like, at what point is it okay to say this is too dangerous and I can't do this, or I'm not strong enough and I'm afraid and I don't want to get involved. I don't want to bring harm to myself or maybe even to my family. So I'm just going to sort of stay and watch and be quiet. I don't know, maybe it's better not to stay then. Maybe it's better to walk away. I'm not sure. But Rabbi Yitzhak Arama seems to be at least making us think about what it means to be a bystander when there's some real serious moral weaknesses around us. And we certainly live in a time where a lot of that is true. We live in a time where there's so much moral weakness that should we be quiet? Should we be bystanders? Or do we have an obligation to raise our voices and to say, no, this can't go on? Hibadlu min ha'ida, separate yourselves. That was God saying to Moshe because he was upset with the Jewish people, possibly according to Yitzhak Arama. But maybe it's also a message to us. No, don't be part of the group. You can't be there. If you can't affect change, do not stay. You must leave. You must leave. It's a tough call. It's a very, very tough call. And the consequences of that position, as we all know, are not easy. I want to conclude, as I often do, with Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And this time I want to just read something, not from the book, the Amazing Life Lessons book on the Parsha, but his other series, it's a part of the same series, I guess, Studies in Spirituality, a weekly reading of the Jewish Bible. And the name of this chapter is Hierarchy in Politics, the Never-Ending Story. I'm just going to read some excerpts. I'm skipping. There were two hierarchical structures in biblical Israel. There were kings and there were priests, among them the high priests. Both were introduced after a crisis, monarchy after the failure of the rule of the judges, the Levitical and Aaronite priesthood after the sin of the golden calf. Both led inevitably to tension and division. Biblical Israel survived as a united kingdom for only 3 generations of kings and then split into 2. The priesthood became a major source of division in the late Second Temple period, leading to sectarian divisions between Sadducees, Boethicians, and the rest. The story of Korach explains why. Where there is hierarchy, there will be competition as to who is the alpha male. Is hierarchy an inevitable feature of all advanced civilizations? Maimonides seemed to say, yes. For him, monarchy was a positive institution, not a mere concession. Abarbanel seems to say, no. There are passages in his writing that suggest he was a utopian anarchist who believed that in an ideal world, no one would rule over anyone. We would each acknowledge only the sovereignty of God. The conclusion seems to follow that where there is hierarchy, there will be struggles to be alpha male. The result is what Thomas Hobbes called a perpetual and restless desire of power after power that ceaseth only in death. And that's why the rabbis focus their attention not on the hierarchical crowns of kingship or priesthood, but on the non-hierarchical crown of Torah, which is open to all who seek it. Here, competition leads not to conflict, but to an increase of wisdom. And where heaven itself, seeing sages disagree, says, these and those are the words of the living God. The Korach story repeats itself in every generation. The antidote is daily immersion in the alternative world of Torah study that seeks truth, not power, and values all equality as voices in a sacred conversation. So there will always be Korachs. There always will be. And that's why in some ways Sefer Bimidbar sounds to be maybe more reflective of the human condition. We're not going to be able to eliminate the yearning for power that some of us have. But if I can't eliminate it, then what can I hope for? Well, what I can hope for, what you and I can hope for, is to create some sort of culture that at least mitigates its tension and its power. And that's Torah, which sort of in some ways is open to everybody. But even in the world of Torah, there's the Rosh Yeshiva, the person who has the ultimate authority to rule, to be a posek, to tell people what to do. It's true. So while Rabbi Sachs seems to think that the world of Torah is a world of equal opportunity, it is, but even there resides some question of hierarchy. So we may never be able to escape that, but we need to learn how to be okay with it. We need to learn to be okay with who we are. We need to learn to be okay with the gifts, the talents, the insights, and the abilities that God gave each of us. I'm not going to be the super scientist. I'm not. And I'm not going to be the world's fastest runner. I'm for sure not. But maybe I can be a really good teacher. Maybe I can maximize that. Or maybe I can be a good scientist, or a good business person, or a good parent, or a good sister, or a good brother, good friend, and encourage. I don't know what it is. Everybody's going to be different. We know that. And maybe that's what makes this Korach story relatable, which is, I got to find my place. And that's what this is about. Somebody who couldn't find their place. And when you can't find your place, it causes such unrest. It causes such pain. It causes such suffering, not only for the person, but usually for the person around them. So maybe our goal is really to try to create in our environments, in our homes, in our schools, in our shuls, in all of our conversations with the people we meet, an acknowledgement of the dignity that each of us has, and encourage everybody to be the best version that they can be, and not worry about what other people think about them, and not worry about the competition. And if we're successful at doing that in Mitzvah Hashem, then maybe we really will be able to say, we brought the Mashiach. So before everybody logs off, next week, I will be out of town for a family event on Tuesday, so we won't be having a class next Tuesday, but the week after Mitzvah Hashem, we will be back. So just want to make sure everybody here knows this coming Tuesday, we won't be here. So thank you, everybody. Again, can't tell you how much I love being able to share my ideas and listen to your ideas, and how much I appreciate you giving an hour or so of your time on Tuesday nights to learn Torah together. May the merit of our Torah study be a zechut for the hostages and help bring the peace that we all look for. Thank you. Please feel free to unmute yourselves. And we can just schmooze a little if you're inclined to do that, although this group is a pretty quiet group, I'll tell you that much. So,
Rabbi, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Given what we just read last week about everyone over a certain age going to die in the desert, were there any commentators who were sympathetic to Korach because he knew what his destiny was going to be? That he had just found out that he was dying, and he was going to die in the desert, and that this was a human reaction.
well, actually, what you see in the Midrash and Gemara, he had some divine inspiration about his future progeny, that from Korach's family comes Shmuel and Navi. And so he thought of himself as a real shtickle macher, that here's a guy who at one point will be able to say, hey, I'm the predecessor of Shmuel and Navi, one of the great prophets following Moshe Rabbeinu. Shmuel and Navi was enormous. And so it wasn't so much, it seems like his fear of dying in the desert. It was, I think, his feeling that while he's around, knowing who he is and his sense of personal importance, he wanted to get the power he could. You know, Neil, all of us, I mean, nobody knows when the time is. Nobody knows. But we all know in the back of our minds, and we don't like to talk about it, that we don't live forever. We all know that. So the question really is, what do you do with the time that you have? And whether it's a little time or a lot of time. And not everybody knows what to do with their time. And Korach seemed to be a person who felt that he would derive more pleasure, more satisfaction, if he had more power, more authority. And it was misplaced. So it's not really mentioned that he was sort of anxious about his forthcoming death in the desert. I mean, the Gemara does say, and this is this is a little disconcerting about how it happened, that every 15th month, every 15th day of Av, they would dig graves, and everybody would lie down in the grave. And that's when those who were destined to die in the desert would pass away. Those who were not destined to die next year would get up. And that's why Tu B'Av became such a great day, because on the day in which God decided that the penalty for what the Meraglim did came to a close, Tu B'Av becomes a day of celebration. It's the end of that divine decree of the death of the Jewish people in the desert. But yeah, there was an awareness of their mortality. And I didn't come across any Meforshim who talked about that being sort of like a psychological variable in Korach's behavior.
And so just a quick follow-up. So on, I think it's Yom Sheni, the prayer for the day, it talks about Livnei Korach. So that's who we're talking about, the same Korach.
Yeah, and in fact, that's very notable that if you think about it, Korach's sons did tshuva the last minute, and they did not join their father. So where his father stood defiantly in front of Moshe Rabbeinu and got swallowed up, Bnei Korach jumped back and said, no, we're not going to do this. We're not joining. To the point that even on Rosh Hashanah, before we blow the shofar, I'm not saying Bnei Korach Mizmor. We say the Mizmor, that Perek of Tehillim, it was authored by the sons of Korach. So talk about the power of tshuva. On the day that we sort of try to remind ourselves about what it means to be a good, better person, we invoke the memory of the sons of Korach who watched their father get swallowed up metaphorically as well as literally.
Thank you.
Yes.
So at the close to the beginning of the shiur, I think you said that it wasn't made clear in the text what it was that Korach wanted for himself. It always struck me that it's not like he wanted to take something for himself. He was just jealous of his cousins.
It seems to be.
He wanted to tear them down.
Well, he definitely, don't forget, Korach's father, right, was Moshe's uncle. Moshe's father was Amram. Amram had a brother, Yitzhak. So he thought, Korach, that he comes from the family of Levi. Why should all the honors be concentrated in only one family strand? Why should something go to me? But he's not explicit about that. He somehow just questions whether Moshe and Aaron have the right to grab the power. And while there's allusion to it, he never comes straight out and says things. And maybe because that too is part of his strategy, because not everybody around him had the same intentions as he did. Like, what's the interest of the people from tribe of Reuven? They're not Leviim even. They have no chance of becoming a Kohen. So why are they there? Well, according to some of Meforshim, they're there because they felt that they were ripped off. In what way? Is because before there were any Levim, before the Shevet Levi was granted this role in the Mishkan, the eldest firstborn were considered to be the spiritual leaders. Well, the oldest is Reuven, and all of the descendants of Reuven should have been given this sort of religious leadership role. But when the Egel HaZahav, the story of the Egel happened, and everybody except Shevet Levi participated, then all the Shvatim lost their sort of right, especially Reuven, and they were upset. They wanted to somehow, at least this group of them, claim their rights back. So you got this disgruntled group of people who are coming together, not because they shared any similar feeling. They just felt that, let's just come at all different angles and a mishmash and see what we can get. But yeah, it was that. Thank you, everybody. I wish everybody a good night, a safe night. Let's wake up to some more good news in Israel and around the world. Be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Only blessings.